Yeah. Good afternoon, Peter.
Malcolm, hello.
Hi. We're now live. So, let's begin just by kind of formally introducing ourselves. I'm Malcolm Underhill, partner at IBB Solicitors. I specialise in acting for victims of child abuse, that is, victims who have come to harm in the recent and distant past, and that's and I support them in either or combination of recovering compensation and damages and enabling them to access treatment and rebuild their lives, hopefully. So that's what I do. Peter, I know what you do, but for the benefit of those who'll be watching this either perhaps now or later, you want to formally introduce yourself?
Yep, as you say, I'm Pete Saunders. I'm founder and chief executive of NAPAC, which stands for the National Association for People Abused in Childhood. We're a registered charity set up to support survivors like me and no doubt some of the people watching this.
Absolutely. I thought it might be interesting, I mean, in terms of sort of structuring this, if we talk about the founding of NAPAC and the progress you've made, and clearly there's been an impetus for that in the last couple of years now, because of events, and then perhaps talk about the support that NAPAC seek to provide with individuals who come forward are reporting harm, and that's a particular area I'm very much interested in, because it's something where I feel that there's insufficient concentration by sort of government agencies in supporting victims of abuse. So that's something I'd sort of like to talk about towards the end of our sort of, I think probably about half an hour chat, I think, we've got in mind. But let's begin by sort of talking how NAPAC was founded, and in those early years, and how that's sort of grown really so very much so because of outside events in the last couple of years.
Well, NAPAC started life, well, it was me. Nearly 19 years ago, I realised I had to try and come to terms with things that had happened to me in my childhood, abuse I'd suffered, and I looked for help all over the place, and I'm generally quite a resourceful chap, but I couldn't find anything that was useful to me. And the feedback that I got as I did my research was, yes, there definitely needs to be a lot more support for survivors of abuse, like yourself, Pete, and so that was the start of a very long journey of setting up what was to become NAPAC, and which is still relatively small, I have to say, compared to the big charities, but also is unique. There is no other UK charity doing the work that we do here, which is to provide a national free phone helpline. We've run support groups, and we're expanding and doing work in prisons and so forth, because one thing that we've identified over the last 19 years is that whereas most survivors of abuse, most victims think they're the only ones that it happened to, actually I am just one of many millions of people in this country who suffered abuse. So the problem is enormous, and NAPAC really needs to grow, or alternatively we need to work perhaps more closely with the health service to provide the kind of support that survivors need, and that's our next big challenge really, is to engage, I think, with the health service, because as you say, the last couple of years we have been inundated with people coming forward following mostly the Savile thing, but even before that with the Pope's visit and so on. These events trigger a lot of memories for a lot of people, and it's now a continuous process. The cat is out the bag about the extent of abuse, and hopefully, thanks to survivors mostly speaking out, and to the good work that you do, I think society is beginning to grasp the very serious and long-term damaging consequences that these crimes have on their victims.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was not that long ago, I was talking to an officer, and she was saying to me that as a consequence of particularly the events at Savile, around Savile, that far more people had the confidence to come forward, confidence that they would be believed. And of course, you and I know that the recently, whereby we've got a police force that are now much more geared up. They are much more sensitive to interviewing victims and do it in, I think, largely a fantastic way. It's very supportive, and I think that's, you know, one of the successes really over the last few years, that we've got a crime agency that really have responded to this very well and are supportive throughout that entire process. And of course, once they get to the point of feeling that they're able to, or the CPS feel that they're able to take matters forward and proceed with the prosecution, there is continuing to support to the extent that there's a victim support officer. But that seems to me, when it comes to victims of child abuse, a bit of a misnomer really, because I think there's from I talk to, whether it's parents of children now, or it is those who were abused in the distant past and are now adults, that there is an expectation of something beyond what they're given, because of course what the police service do principally is to investigate crime and then ultimately pass on to someone else to prosecute. And there seems to be a gap there, that they, you know, once the criminal process really gets into full swing, yes, it's nice to know from the victim's perspective that what the criminal procedure is and everything, but of course they are not being directly supported themselves. They are subject to them using their own endeavours to find avenues of support. They are, to an extent, left to their own devices, and that's far from satisfactory. And I know there's been some talk recently about supporting them through the criminal process, which is good, but of course that's not enough, and certainly isn't enough, because the day that criminal trial ends, whatever the outcome is, it's not over for the victim. And that's, for me, that I get a bit frustrated at the politicians, the way they, yes, it's very, very nice of them now to be ready to investigate. Effectively, no doors are closed in relation to the avenues they're prepared to pursue, but I wish they were prepared to devote as much time, energy and money to supporting the victims, because we just don't really see enough of that. And for me, yes, whilst it's important to learn from the past, you know, these people need supporting, and if we don't support them, then there is a cost to society, both potentially in the short and the long term. So I really do hope that, you know, that it won't be too long before the government begins to realise that it must devote as much time, energy and money to supporting victims. And it's certainly an area over the next year or so I intend to do some bit of research on, to bring home the fact that there is just, you know, such a gap here that it just needs to be filled. The government need to fill it. And I sort of somewhat cynically often sort of say, you know, when it comes to elections, that, you know, politicians will talk about how they brought down, you know, cancer rates and deaths from heart attacks, etc. But mental health issue, whilst we've made progress, it's not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. There's still a bit of, in some respects, there's still a stigma about it. I think we've probably both seen that. But there is, for me, importantly, there is a lack of appreciation of how important it is to deliver excellent mental health services, because that would pay dividends very quickly. Dividends in terms of keeping people out of prison, dividends in terms of ensuring that people are get back perhaps on an education path, back into employment. And you know, we know that, you know, if we can, you know, address these issues, then we will quickly see the positive outcomes from it. So for me, that lack of, I suppose, equal support for the victims as the government are driving at sort of identifying paedophiles and why it's been covered up in the past, we need to address that imbalance. You have your own support systems, and I know you've been sort of looking to invest more and more money into your online support, and I think training of counsellors too. Is that right?
There's all sorts of things that we would like to do, Malcolm. We are only held back by our lack of resources. And everything you just said, I agree with entirely. And to that end, I suppose there is a chink of light that we have finally been invited to go and meet the Secretary of State for Health, which we're doing in September, when they come back from their long holiday, of course. We're going to see Jeremy Hunt, because this is exactly what we have said to him, is that there is little point in expecting and asking victims, survivors, whatever we want to call ourselves, to come forward, particularly, for example, with the forthcoming inquiry that's been announced, if there is no support mechanism for them. In fact, it can be totally counterproductive for the individual to come forward, to pour out their heart, and then to find that they've got absolutely no support. In a way, it's almost better if they kept it locked away than to bring it to the fore and then to have nothing to support them. And you're quite right, organisations like Victim Support, the Witness Service, do fantastic work, but they don't do the sort of work that is needed for the very deep-rooted psychological damage that is caused by abuse. If young people, children, young people, are, in a sense, if they are helped earlier enough, there is every prospect, if they are helped early enough, that they can move on and lead good, healthy lives. The longer it goes on, the longer they don't get help, and there's not a lot of evidence, actually, that even they get sufficient help. So we've got to be honest about this. But as for once they reach adulthood, 18 and beyond, and the sort of people we hear from every day, we hear from people who are still suffering nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks for things that sometimes occurred 40, 50, or even more years ago. This is a crime like no other that leaves an indelible mark within the survivor. And you're absolutely right. There is little point in asking people to come forward to give this vital evidence and to tell their story unless there is some support for them. And NAPAC, as I say, is a small organisation. We're barely 2 handfuls of paid workers and 40, 50 volunteers. Fantastic. But actually, we've got a potential service client group, whatever you want to call it, of realistically in excess of 10 million people, easily. Now, many of those will not want to come forward, and we never ever say people should or must, but many are coming forward, and it would be a disgrace and a shame on the government if they weren't to ensure that there is at least some support mechanism for them for when those people come forward. Because more than anything else, Malcolm, more than anything else, over the many years that I've been doing this work, and the thing that really, in a sense, began to turn my life around, was I simply wanted somebody to listen to me and to not tell me to get over it and that it happened a long time ago, or to have a cup of tea and you'll feel better. Because, they are innocent but quite ignorant remarks, and people need significantly more than that, and some a lot more than others.
Recently I got sort of talking about sort of support for children. It's interesting. The child at the moment, where you talk about, you can put their lives back on track. And as a young lady sort of have come to mind that the NHS did provide some response initially, but as always, it wasn't as perhaps proactive. Perhaps there wasn't an appreciation by the family as to how this could help the child in the long term, and how important it was to engage. Because I think there's still that thing that parents may well think, well, if the child isn't talking about it, that they're fine now, they've got over it type. Whereas you and I know that's not the case. No. But because this particular individual was able to take advantage of litigation, was able to pursue the individuals involved, and was successful, and was able to obtain monies to support them. What that meant, they were then able to enter the private sector, and of course then the family's eyes are opened as to exactly what could be done and how beneficial this could be. And in a way, I wasn't surprised by what I saw, what was coming, which was, you know, the improvements made in that child's development. So as they kind of move towards adulthood, that there was that sense of feeling, actually, when they get there, yes, there are going to be some hiccups along the way, there'll be milestones that will cause them to fall back, perhaps need further support, etc. But you just kind of continually had this feeling that there was always progress being made. And whenever they finished that initial intensive period of support, that they would come out of it on a fairly ground sort of setting and be able to sort of proceed with their life and with a degree of confidence. But that only came, really, I feel, because that individual had the advantage of being able to bring a piece of litigation. If they weren't able to do that, the risk that the NHS support, because of lack of resources, not because of willingness of the individuals involved, but because of a lack of financial resource, would have just fallen away because so many other pressures or immediate pressures are on them. You're going to see the same with adults too. I mean, a chap who I spoke to much earlier in the year, and I could see what was going to benefit if I could just get him into the state system. He said, "Well, I help him to do that," because he didn't feel able to articulate what he wanted to initiate. So I tried to begin that on his behalf, and there was some progress. But then the response to the adult mental health services, local community services, were, "Here's an appointment for September," and you know, I'm sort of despair and thinking. But when I talk to the therapist, I'm talking to the counsellor there, and they're saying, you know, give your client more support, but we just don't have the resource to do that. And in the meantime, sort of my clients sort of sitting at home and, you know, continuing to ruminate on these things, and it's just not satisfactory. And it's a great concern that it's not just going to require a little bit of monetary input from the government. They are going to significantly up their game. So I hope when you come to meet with Mr. Hunt that you can persuade him that, you know, this isn't a small sum of money, but a sum of money, if properly invested, will see some real dividends for society in, say, in the short and the long term. But it's this, you know, lack of support. And of course, we've recently received, I think we've seen a report following research conducted by Young Minds, looking at children mental health services, where they've seen local authorities not just sort of holding funding steady, but withdrawing it, which is just absolutely terrible that they should be doing that at all. So there are a lot more that needs to be done. And I assume from what you say, the counsellors perhaps that you have, that they're volunteers, are they?
All the people who work on our support line are volunteers. They give up their time to come in. We train them, and they come in. But we don't offer counselling as such here, Malcolm. We don't set ourselves up as counsellors because there's all sorts of good reasons for doing that. We are here to support, and most of our volunteers have very good counselling skills. Some actually happen to be qualified counsellors. In fact, we have qualified clinical psychologists that answer the phone as well. So they're people who really know about the issues, but we don't set ourselves up as a counselling line as such, because counselling implies something that is ongoing. And of course, if you know, we will put people in touch with other organisations that can provide ongoing, the few that there are, and we can urge people to contact their NHS to see whether there is any local support that they can tap into. But because our volunteers, by its very nature, do shifts, there's no guarantee that a person calling us is going to speak to the same person next time they call. So we don't offer counselling as such. But I think the other point that is worth picking up on, and the point that we will make to Mr. Hunt, is that the cost, and you know, it's money that ticks these people's boxes. We know that the cost to the economy of child abuse and its consequences are just astronomical. They are unquantifiable in terms of pounds, shillings, and pence. To age myself, the cost of not doing what should be done is unquantifiable, And surely to God, when we spend umpteen billions of pounds on our health service, surely it isn't just about having to produce new money. Surely it's about working smarter. And I was talking, as an example, I was talking to a woman recently who is now a retired psychiatrist, but she spent some years, many years in fact, as a GP, as a general practitioner. And she said that in her opinion, about 70% of her patients that she saw coming through the door with a range of problems, 70%, she said, these problems actually had their root causes in unresolved childhood trauma that caused depression, that then caused physical ailments, that caused all sorts of other issues, physical issues, but brought on by the depression from the unresolved childhood trauma. And I think she's a great example of someone I'm actually seriously considering asking her to come along. She's now in the House of Lords. Seriously considering asking her to come along to see Jeremy Hunt, to say, actually, you know, we can save this country a fortune by doing what is right. And you know, I think even the NSPCC recently have done some research. They're very good at research that costed out the, you know, how much the economy suffers from the huge impact of abuse on society, which pales into insignificance, I have to say, compared to the consequence for the individual. But politicians are more interested in ticking the boxes and the budgets. So that's the card we have to play. But you know, I was talking to a woman just last week here who was told me she was in her mid to late 60s. She'd been abused more than 50 years ago. She said, every time I turn the TV on or open the newspaper, abuse is in my face. She said, I've never forgotten it. I still have nightmares and flashbacks, but it's got worse recently because of everything that's happening. Her response was, but I'm glad it's coming out at last. I'm glad I've suffered in silence for 40 odd years. I'm glad it's coming out, but where is the help for me? And thank God, in her words, thank God for NAPAC. Thank God she was able to get in touch with us and talk to somebody who actually understood.
Yeah, I mean that's the one sense it's terrible to read about and watch and see what's happened over the last few years, the way it's all come out. But at long last, we are getting to the bottom. But I suspect you, like me, Peter, you kind of think there's still an awful long way to go, and there are still aspects to society that that haven't been investigated, but no doubt it will come out in the next few years, because there's nowhere to hide. There's no organisation that can say, oh no, you know, it didn't go on here. The fact is, we know it went on everywhere. Yeah. And these people with their wicked ways found, you know, methods of getting around any systems in any organisation, which was relatively easy, even though only up to a couple of decades ago. You're talking about people approaching you, the support that you have. I mean, when people give me a call, it's not, sometimes I'm able to assist, sometimes I'm not, in terms of sometimes they don't necessarily want much in the way of legal advice, but they're asking for, you know, can you help me, you know, beyond the law, and can you point me in the right direction? Again, one assumes, Peter, you'd be quite happy if I sort of pass on, you know, your organisation's details and sort of recommend you to them in order as that kind of first point of contact, because you know, it's important for me. I don't forget the fact that, you know, I'm just a lawyer, and you know, there are others better qualified to sometimes have that initial conversation. So I hope you'd be content if I sort of point people in your direction and to give, you know, your helpline, to use your helpline to make that initial.
That's what we're here for. We're here. We're mostly survivors at NAPAC, I have to say. Most of us, I think, have moved on in some ways, but we still have our issues. But we get it, we're here, we're in business, we're not going away. We've survived for 19 years, we're going to carry on surviving, and yeah, please do direct people to us. But with the health warning that we get incredibly busy, and there are times when we simply cannot deal with all the calls that are coming in. But people can go on the website. There's a lot of information there. We're still working on updating the website. So, I would ask for some patience because it's very frustrating when you're trying to find information and it's not there. But we're working on all these things. But yeah, we are here and we're not going anywhere. And people eventually get through. And it's a free phone, of course, so it doesn't show up on their phone bills. So people can try as many times as they like. They will get through eventually.
Let me just ask you one question. Mandatory reporting been much in the news recently, and we now seem to be making some progress there. Again, the government, there's some shifting of grounds there, and that would be, I think, a significant improvement. Although having spoken to someone in the States recently, I know that they've had mandatory reporting for some years, but it's an improvement in the system. But it doesn't. There's no way that it ensures that every suspicion is reported. And it's interesting that it's been related to me of one profession, particularly the teaching profession in the States, were described as being poor when it came to reporting of suspicions of abuse. So I think whilst I think we would all support such an introduction here of mandatory reporting, we'd have to be alive to the fact that yes, it would be an improvement, but it's not going to guarantee that we're going to somehow prevent individuals from carrying out their wicked deeds. But I think, like most people, sensible people, it's clearly something that should now be introduced in as soon as possible. Not before the next Parliament, but as long as it can remain on the agenda, and whichever party is elected next year, that early introduction of mandatory reporting would be excellent.
I agree. I can see no logical argument with the introduction of mandatory reporting within regulated activities. We know it could not work in the wider community. Of course it couldn't. But I know, both personally with my own experience in childhood and many other people that I've spoken to, both that were abused by people at my school, but also many hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who have been abused in these sort of institutions where our children are looked after, and there's none bigger than schools, who say that had their abuser been reported 20, 30, 40 years ago, God knows how many children would have been saved from abuse. So I can never understand the government or the NSPCC's argument that mandatory reporting doesn't work, because, as you say, it isn't the silver bullet, or whatever the expression is. It won't eradicate abuse overnight. Of course it won't. We probably never will. It might take many generations, but it is a huge step. And to me, and to many survivors, it's about a change of culture. And culture often will follow certain rules and regulations and changes in the law. And again, I don't know whether it's a good example. It was just one that came to my mind. 40 years ago, we used to drive around. People used to drink, used to drive, you didn't used to put their seatbelts on, and it was generally kind of accepted. It's the way things were. And then society started to realise that actually drinking and driving isn't such a good idea, because people do end up killing other people, and actually having seatbelts on is also generally a good thing, and there was opposition to all these things. And we're talking about something far more precious in a way. We're talking about our children. And surely to God, our children, at the very least, should have the best chance that they can have of getting through childhood relatively unscathed, because they've got the rest of their lives to put up with. And as you know, life isn't always a bed of roses, but let's give our children a chance. And I've spoken to some teachers recently, Malcolm, who cannot understand why we have not got mandatory reporting. They say, well, we are trained to do this, we would always do it, but why doesn't everybody do it? Everybody doesn't do it for lots of reasons, and those are the reasons that we have to kind of, in a sense, demolish. The reputation of the school, career prospects. Did I really witness what I thought I saw? So I think most children and victim survivors would say, I would rather somebody made a mistake that can then be sorted afterwards than to ignore something that is going on. And we've got a history of people witnessing abuse and doing nothing about it. And in my book, actually, that is akin to well,
But
aiding and abetting the abuse.
Well, that's right. In the future, if we get this law in, then that will be an offence in itself, not to report where there's reasonable suspicion. Of course, that can be a matter of debate too when it comes to how you phrase that. But I think the broad principle of introducing mandatory reporting is, it's illogical to argue against it. It's got to be brought in, and then we can worry about the finer detail and the consequences of it later on, and perhaps tweak the law to protect individuals, etc. But no, this is something that should be on the statute book as early as possible. There's no doubt about that.
Indeed.
Peter, thank you for sort of joining me this afternoon. Apologies that we had these technical problems this afternoon, earlier on this morning rather. So thank you much indeed for that. It's been great talking to you. Can I wish you and your colleagues well when you go and meet with the Secretary of State later on in the autumn, and I really do hope that you're successful in persuading him so that he in turn can persuade Mr. Osborne that some serious money should be thrown at the mental health services in this country, both for for children and adults, because as we both know from from your experiences and from those I come across on a day-to-day basis, that there will be immediate dividends, and we'll see some real progress in the lives of many people. So I wish you well, and perhaps we can talk again after your meeting later on in the new year.
Indeed. Meet for a coffee sometime, maybe, too.
Indeed, Peter, we will do that and celebrate success, hopefully, persuading the government to do the right thing on two fronts. That would be fantastic.
One step at a time. One step at a time. We're getting there.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Peter.
You're very welcome. Nice to talk to you, Malcolm.
And you, Peter.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.